Hello and welcome to today's video. In February of 2020, I published this video, how to organize your craft show. And turns out maybe it wasn't the best timing, who knew? I was gonna make this video as a follow-up and I didn't think there was any point last year, but I feel like I do now want to get this information out there if you wanna start thinking about your own craft show. So this is a sort of companion video to, again, this video, which I will link up here. And this is what to do the day of your craft show. Now, every situation will be different, of course. There are maybe things you will need to consider that I don't list here, and there might be some things I talk about that you won't have to worry about. This is really just a general guideline to help you get started thinking about what you'll need to do on the day of your craft show. I think it's important, even as you're beginning to plan your craft show and throughout, to start working on a checklist of items that you'll need and things you'll need to do on the day of the craft show. So once you have this list, check it twice and maybe 3 times. You might want to have this list on your phone or tablet or computer if you bring one to the show. It might also be good to have several hard copies. You can even share them with your volunteers if you have helpers helping out the craft show. But it's good to have everything written down because you will forget something. I'm going to link in the video description to my blog where I will have a day of checklist. So be sure to check that out after you watch this video. Now, this isn't really a day of item, if possible, and it may not be possible, but depending on the situation, you might be able to get into your venue the night before. For example, when I hosted a craft show at my own church, it was no problem getting in there. I had the key and I could then lock up after we were done setting up. But if you can set up the night before, or at least begin to, that will really help things go smoothly the day of. Another thing you want to do is make sure to remind your helpers, if you have helpers. Again, I talked about this in my first video. If you have volunteers or even paid helpers that are assisting with the running of the craft show, make sure they get to the show on time, make sure they know what to do. Again, give them a checklist so that they can help vendors and other people find their spot. Make sure you or somebody is able to direct vendors to the appropriate parking areas and to the room of the show itself, where to set up, etc. Let's say your show begins at 10 o'clock in the morning. Maybe setup begins at 8 o'clock or 7. It's a good idea to try to get there 30 minutes before the show setup begins. So if your setup begins at 7, try to aim to be there at 6:30. I say this because personally, I'm usually late to pretty much everything. So if you're like me, this is something to think about. Try to aim for 30 minutes early so that if you are running late, hopefully you will get there on time. There will probably be at least 1 or 2 vendors who get there before they're supposed to be there. So if you're even a minute late, they might not like that. Of course, it's important to get everything set up in a timely fashion, but it's also important that you get your people out of there on time once the show is over. Make sure you don't run over your allotted time at your venue. Usually this isn't a problem. People are ready to go when the show is over, but I have on occasion had people who took a long time to clean up their booth, and had the manager of the venue not been understanding, I would have gotten charged for another hour, and thankfully I did not. They were very kind, but it could happen. And again, when everybody's tearing down their booth, make sure the venue is cleaned up. If there are messes, get them picked up. You could possibly be charged extra money if you do leave a mess at the venue. And again, it's just common courtesy. So think about making sure everything is as tidy as you found it. Another important thing is to be flexible. Things can change at the last minute. You might end up having more vendors than you accounted for. This actually happened to me once. Thankfully, I guess, another vendor didn't show up. If everybody had shown up, I honestly don't know what I would have done. I actually had to place a vendor in the hallway. Now, that was not my finest moment. It happened. Thankfully, the hallway was on the way to the main craft show. She got a lot of exposure because everybody had to walk by her booth. But it was not ideal. She was so understanding. She didn't complain at all. She was really gracious about it, but it would have been better if I had not had to done that. So again, double check, make sure you have space for everyone, make sure you didn't miscount your vendors, and Again, be flexible. If for some reason somebody doesn't show up or you have to move people around, it might be good to have several backup plans depending on how your situation might change. Try to be very flexible the day of your show. It's easy for vendors to become flustered if things have to change, which is really understandable. So it's really important for you as the organizer to be very gracious and patient and try to accommodate everybody as much as you possibly can. Another thing I think is important, not necessarily on the day of, but maybe a day or a few days later, is to thank your vendors through an email and thank the customers who came to the show, whether it's on Facebook or some other social media platform where they might follow you. It's just a nice way to follow up. You might also think about, and this isn't necessarily something you need to do, but something I have done in the past is send a survey to your vendors so that you can find out what they thought of the show and possibly find out if there's anything you did right or wrong or what you could do to improve the way things were run. Also, after the show, and this is a really important step, is to submit any necessary tax information. Now, I don't go over tax stuff extensively because I'm not an expert, but again, I believe I mentioned this in my previous video, but you need to make sure you know all the tax rules and whether you need a permit, and you will probably need to either distribute temporary tax IDs to your vendors, or if they already have a tax ID, they can use that. Again, I'm not going to go over that a lot, but you probably will need to submit some kind of information to your state for sales tax purposes. So be sure to follow up with anything like that. And last but not least, I think it's important to make notes about your show, noting what went well and what went wrong, and what you might want to change in the future, what you want to keep. It's important to do this, I think, while it's fresh in your mind, because you might even forget the simplest things. I know I'm constantly forgetting things. I think I'll remember. So it's just a good practice to write these things down before too much time goes by if you think you want to do another craft show in the future. If you thought this video was helpful, or at least got you to thinking about some things, give it a like, give it a thumbs up below, and be sure to check out again my first video, if you haven't already, about how to begin organizing and planning your craft show. And again, I will link below in the video description to my blog where you can find this information written out. You can also find a checklist for the day of and an example for your vendor application if you're looking for information on how to make that. Also, let me know in the comments what types of videos you might like to see next, or what questions you have about craft shows or crafting or anything like that. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.